Okay, now we're going to start the question and answer section, the final Q&A. Same rules as yesterday apply. We'll have the three folks in the uniform with the microphones. Raise your hands. Make sure you keep the microphone close to your mouth so the people online, as well as in here, myself especially, can hear what your question is. But before we do that, I'm going to go to Colonel Brannon. We have the 4 questions from yesterday that we took for the record. So, Colonel, over to you.
All right, so someone asked for an update, and we double-checked that these are McKeague families, so we can share this information. Herdlicka, Refno 084, Ms. Milner, you asked about this. From 1 August to 4 September 2021, TAC 5 LA did an excavation, and then the team excavated 272 square meters to depth, ranging, 45 to 90 CMBs, centimeters below surface, thank you. Possible biological evidence, possible human remains, and possible osseous material were recovered, retained. The site was suspended, which means plan for further. Went back in November of 23 on 24 TAC 1 LA, resumed excavation, recovered and retained possible osseous, and the DPAA lab received all the recovered evidentiary items and assessed them into the lab, and the analysis of that is still pending. And for Shelton 0079, 1 August through 4 September 21, the recovery team excavated alleged burial site. They excavated 180 square meters to 30 to 240 centimeters below surface. They wrote that out for me, so I didn't have to remember that. On 4 September 21, suspended recovery, and then on 15 September 21, the evidence, the items recovered were assigned into the lab, a session in the lab, and there is a pending detailed search and recovery report, and possible osseous material and possible life support equipment are being analyzed in the lab. So there's an update on those two. I don't have any more information on those two.
Neither one of the families have been informed about this.
Okay.
So,
all right. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, though.
Well, we'll make sure that the families get a follow-on update immediately after this briefing. I'm looking for Matt Kristoff will take care of that. We'll send them a quick summary.
Okay. Wasn't there another question yet? Or was that the same question one?
The other question was evidence sessions during JFAs, and I provided that during my brief.
Okay, great. The third question, Susan Milner, you had asked about the 1971 ad hoc committee, where DIA and others participate, where to find that information. You said you had submitted a FOIA to DIA. The full name of that group was the Ad Hoc Interagency Committee. That's the one that, Ann Mills Griffiths sat on. So that was led by the State Department. So DOD does not have those records. You may wish to contact Ms. Griffiths, as she may have retained records from her time on that committee.
Okay, so nobody's got records on that?
We do not have the records on that, no. That was not part of our program, I guess you would say. I guess not program's not the right thing. But no, we don't have the records from that time. It was
a State Department.
It was a State Department led the interagency working group, if you'd call it that. And so, but I think Ms. Griffiths may in fact have some records on that, so she would be the easiest route. You don't have to submit a FOIA to Ms. Griffiths. And question 4, that's going to be Nicolette. You want me to read the question, or you got it? The question was, have cadaver dogs ever been used to find remains? No, it was the follow-up question. Sorry, I digress. Gentleman pointed out that in 2003, cadaver dogs were used and found the remains of Captain Phillips.
Yes, thank you so much. So I wanted to address the topic that we were talking about yesterday with cadaver dogs. You had mentioned that the remains of Captain Phillips were found after the use of cadaver dogs. And I didn't answer you at the time yesterday because I didn't know the specifics of the case, so I wanted to get some details before actually saying anything in front of everyone. So in 2003, we did go and we conducted an excavation of the site associated with Captain Phillips' loss. The cadaver dogs alerted in two areas. So the first area was called the dog alert area, and in that location, the excavation team excavated 128 square meters, and the excavation team did not find any evidence at all. The dog also demonstrated interest, so this is different than an alert area. So the dog demonstrated interest in a separate area, and in that area, the team also conducted excavation operations. They recovered possible osseous material. When that material was brought back to the laboratory, the additional testing determined that that possible osseous material was actually, in fact, non-human material. Subsequent to this first excavation, a second recovery team returned to the site the following year in 2004, and they conducted additional excavations following the archaeological recommendations that were provided by the SRE based on the spatial distribution of evidence that they found in the field. And that is when the remains of Captain Phillips were recovered. Those remains were found at a distance greater than 8 meters away from either of the dog alert areas. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. We take the first question on the left here.
It's a two-part question, sort of a follow-up yesterday to the water losses. So I guess specifically, what are we doing, whether it's our own assets or partnerships, for water losses specific to the Gulf that are greater than 2 miles offshore?
So we have been working through IP with the talking with PAC Fleet in the hopes of trying to get a survey vessel out there to do a survey. Some of the challenges when we get greater than 2 miles, you start getting into some areas that PRC has a lot of activity. There's a lot of conflict there, so it's getting the approval out to that range outside of the right territorial waters. But we are working through that, and we continue to try to figure out a way to get after that. Partners may be an option, certainly, and I think we talked a little bit about this yesterday. And it is something that we're looking at. We definitely are looking to try to increase our underwater missions, right? Balancing that with the what I call high demand, low density specialty skills that are required. So as we look at the planning in the future for water missions, what's the number of divers we got to request to do that? But it's a challenge that geopolitical issues get in the way of us being able to do what we really want to do there.
Sure. And kind of a follow-up, and I know we talked a little bit about this as well, Colonel. Yeah. Those of us who are listed as KIA body non-recoverable that are in the water, is DPAA doing anything to reevaluate those specific cases, not necessarily case by case, but as a whole, because the technology and the capabilities that we have now versus what we had in 1968 are exponentially different. So those that may have been deemed non-recoverable at that time in areas like my dad, who was in less than 15 fathoms of water, at this time, with the technology and the capabilities we have, is recoverable, potentially, obviously. So are we doing anything to reevaluate those as a whole because of that classification? In my opinion, we're getting, for the lack of a better term, shelved because it may just be assumed that he is non-recoverable when in fact there may be some things that are doing that. So are we looking to reevaluate any of those cases as a whole, not necessarily case by case, but as a whole from a body non-recoverable to a different status?
So for the water losses like that, yes, we are. A lot of those cases were put into what was then called a no further pursuit status in the mid-90s, and that was based on the thought at the time it's a water loss. We're not going to find them, with the capability that they had at the time. Now, with additional capabilities, the current definition of no further pursuit is non-recoverable, meaning we think the remains are not physically recoverable. Our question is that true for all of these water cases? It's probably not. So if the water loss is in shallow water, technically those remains should be recoverable if we had something to pursue information-wise. So we're looking at those on an individual basis, those water losses, starting with the depth of the water and then taking it from there to see if we have information to pursue.
Yeah, and Matt, you guys are reviewing those during your case coordination conferences,
Yes,
correct?
sir. They're reviewed during our case coordination conferences.
All right, I'm going to go here to the right.
I'm Steve Morrissey. My father, Colonel Robert David Morrissey, shot down November 7, 1972 in North Vietnam. In the mid-90s, a crash site was associated with my father's case, and one small piece of bone was discovered at the site. It was too small to be tested for DNA. That piece of bone was retained for future processing. My family made repeated inquiries regarding that bone as to when it would be tested and what the results were. In 2014, I visited Silhai and was informed that the bone had been tested and identified as my father's pilot, Colonel Brown, 3 years previously. At the time the bone was tested, my mother was still fully able to understand the implications of that discovery. By the time I accidentally discovered the truth, she was no longer able to understand that. So it's extremely painful for me to hear promises of when we know something, you'll know something, when in our case that wasn't true. And I'm not saying this to embarrass anybody or hurt anybody's feelings, but I couldn't come here without both privately and publicly challenging you to do better at fulfilling those promises that we've had from people in your positions for all of my life. And the reason I felt that I had to say this publicly was because, just like the Herdlickas, I know there are other families that at some point in the future, somebody will have information that the family doesn't. And I want to challenge you to have that perspective on those cases. So when you see a case and you say, we know something that the family doesn't, that you share that with them, because time is running out. You missed the chance to do right by my mother, and I'm asking you not to do that with these other families.
Steve, you're absolutely right. We failed. We failed miserably. I think in your case, and again, I'm not making excuses, but we should always look at losses that have similarities. In Steve's case, the one we identified was his father's crewmate. Now, one could argue, well, that's their business and not the Morrissey's business. Wrong. This was a group. These men died in combat together. So we failed. So we will take that back and ensure that does not happen again, because in many of your cases, you've established long-term relationships because your loved ones were side by side in an airplane, side by side in a foxhole. We owe it to you to treat them, not as a group, but as one where there's interrelationships that we need to be sensitive to. Thank you for poking us in the chest, punching us in the face like we deserve.
Right over here.
Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Mortati. I'm a retired professor from American University here in D.C. I'm a volunteer MIA researcher focusing on aircraft losses. My question has to do with the availability of the search and rescue logs on the Library of Congress website. For context, what's available on the Library of Congress is the earliest record, and these are the SAR logs at the search and rescue center coordination centers. These are not the individual unit histories. There is June of 1967, that's the earliest, and then there's nothing until January 1968, and then there's every month until April or May of 1973. So I've been to the Library of Congress twice, talked to the archivists. I've been to the National Archives in College Park. I contacted the Air Force Historical Research Agency at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, and I also contacted the Department of the Air Force Records Office. I have been unable to figure out where these search and rescue logs might be, if they even exist. I sat in on a couple of case briefings the last 2 days, and I got conflicting information from various members of DPA as to whether they existed, they didn't exist, where they are in the process of declassification and redaction. So I understand that the actual moving of documents is not your responsibility, but as an aircraft loss researcher, the search and rescue logs are among the most important because they are almost always the very first indication. So I don't know if you can answer the question, but I would like somebody to look in and see if they can figure out where these documents are and where they are in the process and when we can expect them to see them on the Library of Congress website. Thank you.
And we'll work on that. We'll have conversations with you specifically about that. I think we have some stuff that you haven't seen, and it probably needs to go through mandatory declass review, right? There are some gaps, though. We do know that there are some gaps.
A lot of those records, the Air Force records, are all at Maxwell Air Force Base in the Air Force Library.
Right. We know that there are a lot of those records at Maxwell, but there are gaps in them. That's the problem.
Thank you. Right over here.
This isn't so much a question as an observation. I had my meeting today upstairs, and it was definitely fabulous one. And part of the lessons I'm taking away from this is always tell my story. So there's a few pieces of my story that were left out when my husband's plane went down, and he was finally declared missing. The Army packed me up to take me home, put all my stuff on a truck, including my car, and sent me back home. And when they unpacked all my stuff, every single item of my husband's was missing. His uniforms, his toothbrush, his hair, his every photo. I have nothing of my husband, but one maybe photo that's now fading that was a Polaroid. So your liaison officer pulled up a picture of my husband, and of course I immediately started to sob. But anyway, I walked around all day listening and talking to people and took away some things, which is repeatedly to tell my story, and that no amount of sucking up is too much. So on the lighter side, I said, well, who do you go to? What do you do? Well, I'd rather start at the top. So I wanted to tell you that Director McKeague, your first name is Kelly. I have a rescue Shih Tzu, and I named her Kelly. So if you could just, see where my husband is, he's with 3 other men, really be grateful. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Yes, the first, it may just be a comment, but this morning when Mr. Whitworth was talking about the National Geospatial Agency, I got the feeling they've had imagery for decades, and very good imagery, and families can't get to it. I don't understand why nobody can get to this imagery, and especially when it has to do with POW camps or satellite imagery of live sightings. You can't get to the imagery. So, anybody have any suggestions?
Nothing. Yeah, when he was talking about satellite imagery, he was talking about, specific cases. I don't know about what is available from the Vietnam War satellite imagery-wise. Most of the stuff we're getting is from aircraft, reconnaissance aircraft. I will say the challenge with what imagery they're collecting in some cases is the means, methods, and sources are classified. which means that they would have to completely strip out any information that might be useful and you just get a picture, right? So I don't know. We would have to go back. Look, I've drafted a letter for the principal deputy director to send to NGA to engage with them on how we can facilitate getting some of our work done and maybe prioritized. Again, I kind of talked about this yesterday. Right? We were competing with real-world, real-time national security priorities, and trying to figure out where maybe a team that isn't as committed, that has some more bandwidth to do more for us. So, I mean, that was really recently within the last couple weeks that's gone through. I will continue to work that. I don't have an answer about satellite imagery. I don't know if you do from Vietnam War era, but
I could just add that the resolution isn't quite what you think it is. So 1 pixel, even on this better imagery that we're getting, 1 pixel in that picture is still bigger than an isolated burial site. So you're not going to find an isolated burial site on this imagery. You're not going to find, like, you're talking about live sighting stuff. You're not going to see an individual. Just 1 pixel is bigger than that individual or potential grave site.
But during the Cuban Missile Crisis, I mean, we saw pictures of the Russian trucks and the missiles and everything. Isn't that aerial imagery?
I can't hear it. I can't understand what you're...
Okay, well, it was just a comment. The Cuban Missile Crisis, some of us in here saw the Russian trucks in Cuba and the the rockets and everything, or the missiles. I mean, wasn't that aerial satellite imagery or?
Yeah, that was. My point is, we're not getting stuff of the real close resolution like that to work with.
Okay. All righty, and my second question. When was the last known alive sighting reported? Like, are you all still getting people reporting seeing Americans? You're not?
No. You want to, yeah.
Susan, we rarely, in fact, this past fiscal year, I don't think we've had anybody report live sighting information to us. And it's been that way for a number of years. And I don't know if it's a passage of time. It might be, loss of interest in the issue locally. But we rarely get information reported to us.
Okay. I've got another question.
Here. Go ahead.
Real quick, sorry.
Just wait for the microphone, please.
Tom Gillen, son of Ref No 1560. Following up on the AFRA history office in Maxwell, I was wondering if you guys maybe could somehow have us granted access to things, everything up there that I was interested in, squadron histories, local reports, things like that. Despite levels of security clearance, I was denied because lack of a need to know. I'm just wondering if maybe you could work to grant access either individually on a case-by-case basis or a blanket that they at least consider allowing us. Ironically, I had a friend in the Civil Air Patrol, just a casual relationship with the Civil Air Patrol, and they let him in, which I thought was odd. That's all. Not a complaint, just a request.
Hello, I'm Karen Stedman. My dad is MIA F4 pilot off the scope case. In the concept of imagery, I want to piggyback onto the previous question. It's a real roadblock not being able to get imagery. And I do understand that they're cylinders, they're canisters, I guess. It takes a lot of time to go through them with microfiche readers, going old school, pre-Google. But what about having volunteers who want to spend some time going through canisters to help our cases, to help other people's cases? Because that's a huge roadblock in there shouldn't be anything that's classified after 50-some years with that. And there are people I know, including myself, who would be more than willing to help go through some of this imagery stuff. And what's the roadblocks with it?
So the imagery challenge for that is it takes a decent amount of training by people that have been trained to do the imagery work just to do the collection piece of that. We have a person on our team who used to do that while on active duty, is not paid for doing that now, but that individual is going to be training the new employees that are already on board that are going to be doing that. So that training should happen over the next couple weeks, and then they'll be able to go over there and regularly pull imagery. But it does take some additional knowledge and training. It's not quite as easy as a Google search.
Karen, I would add that there are private opportunities that we're looking at and pursuing with true capabilities and talents that would augment what Matt just talked about.
All right, I'm going to go on this side and then you can come back. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Stephanie. This is my first time here, and I'm here on behalf of my grandfather, Staff Sergeant Andrew Brassville. His ref number is 1586. This question is in part to Dr. Parr. She was stating that sometimes during the sites, there can be sandbags that are placed around the sites to protect the integrity of the site from environmental factors. My question is, are there any security measures that are put in place to also secure the sites? Like, for instance, if you're working on a site for 3-4 months and then you suspend it and you know you're coming back to that site later on, what security measures are put in place to protect the integrity of that site so that you know it's not going to be tampered with when you revisit at a later date?
Thank you for that question. So
Thank
we
you.
are always working with our local debts are always working with the local officials, and they go down from the province down to the district to the village areas, and so they are typically in placing security measures to protect these sites. Sometimes the sites are not completely, and we can't restrict access. That's something that we can impose on the local population. So some of our sites are in local agricultural areas. So there are times that one individual might excavate a site, and a few months later we come and they've planted some crops, and that's just something that we have to mitigate when we get there.
We're here now.
My name's Sherry Rungstead, and my father is Warren Anderson. So we want to talk to you in the purple afterwards. So my question is for you, Colonel Brennan. In your talk earlier today, you said we're going to do things a little bit differently now, and I think you were talking about when you talked to the officials in Southeast Asia, maybe last September in Vietnam, that you maybe pushed a little bit, and so now we're going to do things differently. And I was just wondering if you had an example of that.
Yeah.
Do you remember saying that?
Sure, yeah. So an example would be when we're doing investigations, we dig test pits, like if we have a hit on something that may be of metal, whatever, and we'll do a test pit. The VNOS&P were limiting the size that we could dig that test pit because they're concerned that we're going to turn an investigation into an excavation. So we spent several hours, and then afterwards a bottle of Jack Daniels, talking over it with some alcohol diplomacy, I guess. It was one of the worst next days of my life. We got them to agree, as if we need that we're able to have that conversation, and they're willing to work. So things like that that open up our aperture. And then, a couple years ago, we came up with what we called out-of-the-box ideas. So there's a whole slew of things. If we can use excavation or heavy equipment on certain cases, which we do, right? Is there a way to expand that? So just thinking about ways that we can within the time constraints that the host nation places on us on the amount of time we're allowed to do a recovery to maximize the work we need to do while maintaining the scientific integrity of the work that's being done. So that's what I was kind of getting after, was just thinking about always trying to innovate, right? And then, 2 more examples of us not giving ourselves the gift of done. The team hears me say that all the time, right? Just because we come back from the field, right, there's work that's done after that. We got to do the analysis on the back end. We got to finalize the reports. And we're not done with that mission, whether it's investigation or recovery, until we have ensured the families have been properly updated, right? We need to give ourselves and you the gift of done. So we obviously have some work to do there, but those are the kind of things that I'm talking about, and the team probably is really tired of hearing me say giving ourselves the gift of done. But I probably say that way more often than I should.
Sherry, and I would add, this is an ongoing process. It's one that we continue to press all 3 countries with. We talked yesterday about doubling the length of dive days from 30 to 60. That took several iterations with the Vietnamese. With Laos, we pressed them on consolidating base camps and allowing us to be able to do more, do it in a more efficient manner, and cut down on helicopters that were taking the teams. But again, it's ongoing. A lot of times they'll come up with ideas, we'll come up with ideas, Stony Beach will. And so it's a constant process to improve things to make us more efficient and more effective.
Over here.
I apologize if I sound a little bit frustrated or angry. And maybe I'm just confused, but 30 years ago, I led you folks to a crash site that proved not to be my brother's. My research indicates that it could be as many as 30 Air Force cases. DIA proved beyond a doubt that this crash site could not be my brother's. I actually agreed with them before they told me that. But I had to have it proved because the fellow who took a picture that indicated that was my brother's crash site, he thought it was impacting, and therefore that's what led me to this crash site. The nearest crash site that you folks knew about was 7 miles away. You folks agreed with DIA that this was not my brother's crash site. So I'm not talking about my brother. I'm talking about some other case, some Air Force case, maybe as much as 30 cases that could be in this crash site. Now, the reason this is so important to me is that 2 people were seen to eject from that plane. Whatever plane that was, they ejected from that plane successfully, went to parachutes. And so as soon as I was told in 1996 that was not my brother's crash site, that it was absolutely not my brother's crash site, I asked them, I says, well, whose crash site is it? And they said, well, we don't know. And I said, well, you're going to excavate the crash site, aren't you, to try to identify the plane and therefore identify those 2 men who you don't know, you don't know their identity, you don't know their status? And the answer was no. Just a simple no. And I've been trying to get that crash site excavated for, well, ever since 1996. And now I just learned in my conference today that you folks are now back to believing this crash site is Ray Gun 3, my brother's crash site, my brother's plane. And now you're going to go to satellite imagery to try to figure out, you know where the crash site is, but you're going to go to satellite imagery to find out if there was a crash site there before May 19th or after May 19th, which will indicate whether or not it's my brother's. Well, it's already been proven not to be my brother's. And you folks even agreed with. I have a document where one of your numbers, a Navy lieutenant commander, made the mistake of, in a letter to me, of indicating that it was my brother's crash site. And I said, no, that's not true. And then you folks backed me up by saying, we apologize for the lieutenant commander. This is, in fact, not your brother's crash site. I don't know whose crash site it is, but there's 2 families that are still waiting to find out. Possibly 2 families. Maybe these guys came home. Or maybe they've got remains that came home. But you don't know until you find out who they are. We have witnesses that were on the incident on May 19th when my brother was shot down. His plane was seen to go into the mountain about 2 miles east of where this crash site is. So you've got witness testimony. They say that this crashed far away from this crash site that I found for you. And I'm frustrated. It's been 30 years now, and I feel like I represent a couple of Air Force families. I don't know what else to do. I think I could prove to anybody here, I could show you this photograph, a photograph that led to this crash site, and you would agree that I assumed that I didn't assume the plane was crashing. The fellow who took the picture of this plane, my brother's plane going down, he thought it was impacting. He was sure it was impacting. It was proven that the plane was still airborne by thousands of feet. Therefore, it couldn't have been impacting on the spot on the earth.
Hey, Luck, just in the interest, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but let Dane Magoon was the analyst. Let's you and I and Dane sit down right after this, and we'll talk through it. I don't know the ins and outs and the details. I don't know, maybe new information came, right? So just in the interest of having opportunity for other families to share, or if you're okay with that, I just asked so we can have other families ask questions. Or if you have a question, right?
Well, once again, I'm not representing my brother. There may be as many as 30 people, 30 families here that might be involved in this. I'm representing somebody I don't even know.
Yeah, well, there's so many, right? We have a list of aircraft lost locations. Some of those lost locations are resolved cases. Some of those we know that the pilots were recovered. We have that map of that area. I am sure there is a analytical reason for what you got today. I just, I don't want to flesh that out here. But there's a swath of things that are done to identify when we're going to go investigate or recover at a site.
Well, I will say just one thing, that it would have taken, I don't know how many days it would have taken to excavate this crash site 28 years ago. But it's been at least it's probably been 15 years since Commander Neto was here, one of the analysts, that satellite imagery request was made, and it's been 15 or 20 years. 15 or 10 years. It hasn't been done yet. You could have found out who these guys were 30 years ago, or 28 years ago. So I don't understand. I know you've got procedures, you've got ways of getting to a conclusion of this. I get the feeling. And in fact, here's another point too. In the fact that this plane is not known, you don't know what kind of a plane it is. 2 crewmen got out. You don't know if there's still crewmen in that crash site.
Yeah, you're right. Standing here right now, I don't know because I don't have the details.
Okay.
Right.
I'll talk to you later.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to spend as much time as you want.
All right, we're going to go over on this side, please.
I've got kind of a wide open question. It has to do with 2 different areas. It has to do with Texas Tech. I've tried using your database in the past, and I don't know if it's been fixed or not, but I'd put a protocol in or whatever I'm trying to search for, and I would get everything in the world but a Vietnam entry from the database. Has that linkage been cleaned up?
Hand him the mic, Brad, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure the specific issue you might have encountered, but the searches that we conduct now are pretty effective. So if you'd like to sit down with a laptop or something after this meeting, be happy to walk through searching the virtual archive and maybe find the issue that you've encountered. But our searches are working very effectively right now.
It's been a while since I've used it, but it was kind of interesting because it got everything in the world but Vietnam that came up in the database.
Well, yeah, let's sit down and look at that together, because I know the system does work.
But the second thing has to do with document control and management and handling. The discussioners on Wednesday afternoon was talking about redaction of documents, the way they're in the Library of Congress, and everybody has their files and what they have, and we have a bunch of files that are all redacted to the end of creation. And you were talking about, during the presentation, you were talking about one of the deals that has the guy's name in it, his address, his age, birthday, everything but maybe a shoe size. It was talking about the description of the guy in the document. Is there a different protocol for the way you guys are collecting data? I like it if you get all the different information. I don't want it to be redacted, but I'd like to find out how to open it up for the rest of us to be able to get that kind of information. I guess it's a bunch of their side too.
Well, they would have a different protocol because they're not the federal government, for one thing. And I think the example you showed was a foreign document that you got. So that's totally two different things. If they have documents that came from the National Archives or from DIA, DPMO, and DPAA, there would be the appropriate redactions that are mandated by regulation. So, but you can expand
absolutely.
on that.
And the collection is, again, a military intelligence collection and is available at the National Archives. And the information that's contained within those documents is military information from the war itself. And so we look at PII differently for those documents than we would, for instance, for a veteran who donates a copy of his DD-214. And we're going to go in and redact that information, the important information from that, Social Security numbers or registration numbers, things like that, date of birth if necessary. And we'll make sure that that document is clean and safe for online presentation so long as the veteran is authorized that. But the documents in the virtual archive for the CDEC collection, captured documents, we view that information on those documents differently, primarily because it's a captured set of materials. And the information contained, like the addresses and things like that, are typically, they are personal information, personal details. The date of birth is a personal detail, but it's a part of that military intelligence set as opposed to a personal collection. So we do view it differently.
Good.
Good afternoon. My name is Dawn Peterson. I'm the daughter of Captain Ronald Stafford, who went down in his F-111 November 1972, also with Captain Charles Caffarelli. They went down in shallow water. I appreciate the question earlier about, the question and the response, by the way, earlier about reviewing these underwater cases that had previously been considered unrecoverable. So thank you for that. I've been assured in our case presentation that we are reasserting our case. They are reasserting our case every time. It's good. And they told me that we have access in Vietnam. We're granted access, but we don't have the assets to do those investigations. So in our case presentation, they told me to push on you guys to acquire more assets to use the new technologies and do these investigations underwater. I'm just going to also say that I've talked to some of you individually. Thank you. And you told me to push in our case presentation to get more assets. So it's that little circle. And again, I'm most appreciative of what's been done. But I've been told to push, so consider, I guess, yourself pushed, please. Thank you.
Underwater archaeologists. We got 4 underwater archaeologists. Mike.
Do we have two mics up here?
So we really are pursuing a lot with partnerships in underwater. As a matter of fact, Alpha Vietnam, I think as I mentioned, we have a terrific relationship with the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. They've been out there 2-3 times, going again this July. And we're always looking for more assets, more partners who can do research. We did the deepest underwater recovery effort for the agency, internal or partner, last year at a depth of over 300 feet. So partners are bringing this to us, and they bring relationships like Scripps has in Vietnam, where they're trusted and are supported by the Vietnamese. So from the partnership part, we're trying to bring more to the table, and then we work with our internal partners as they prioritize and let us know which ones they feel are appropriate for partners. So we're on the case, and the technology is making amazing advances. Divers can go deeper, stay longer. The remote sensing, it's really neat stuff. A lot of interesting things. Environmental DNA, we can look for the possible presence of environment or DNA that may have gotten loose in the water and things like that. So, yeah, anything else you want me to bring up? Yeah, so just very much bringing more to the table, and hopefully will help with your case.
Okay.
I'm Pam Kane, a long-term family member and attendee of annual meetings. And I once again want to welcome all the first-time family members who are here. I really, really hope that at this time today you're in a much different and even better place than you were yesterday morning. And I've met a couple of you. I hope to meet more of you, and I hope you've been welcomed and have begun relationships with some of the families in this room and some of the people that maybe had to leave already. But we've been around a long time, but it's a family group that truly is bonded by what we've been through. I just briefly want to revisit yesterday's comments about should I be at the league meeting, should I be here, what's going on in the two organizations, and to reiterate that there are two family organizations now, the League of Families, of course, and I am on the board of Mission POW, MIA. Two other board members have been attending the meetings yesterday and today. We also have two board members and our executive director who are in Vietnam right now on a trip sponsored by the USIP, which is the United States Institute of Peace, and they've been doing some good things overseas. And I think the confusion is, and I don't mean to be doing a commercial for DPAA, but I guess I am, because in this room you're going to get the official government information and from government officials, and the league may have some other things going on over there, but every family member is welcome here. I see some league members, again, they're longtime friends, and I do consider them family, but just know that all family members, all you have to do is contact your service casualty office, and they will make sure you're registered for this. And I hope all of the first-timers will be back next year. I hope one day we don't have to come back, but I just want to say thank you, and it was a good meeting.
Thank you. Go on this side, please.
Just two or three things. I've been going to the Remains Identification Laboratory since the mid-'90s. My brother was, there was a dormitory named after him in the mid-'90s, and that's named King's Hall at Hickam Air Force Base. And that's when I first got a chance to go to SoHi. And there's been a huge change in the identification laboratory that was completed but not filled up with remains in 2015. And by the time I got back because of COVID in 2022, it was packed. and they had just completed excavating. Actually, they had decided to work on the Oklahoma that was sitting at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, and they were digging up the graves at the punch bowl, and they were completing the skeletons with the bones that they were finding inside the Oklahoma setting at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, which you could really tell the difference of the bones setting on the tables, because the bones in the water were dark and black, and the bones that were buried at the punch bowl in Honolulu were white. So I'm not real sure why that was done, but maybe it was part of this first effort to start identifying with remains underwater. I have no idea. But anyways, I do know that all of the Oklahoma guys have been 100% at this last visit, which was just in April this year when I went back. The Oklahoma project was complete. And I also asked must have been about 1990, I asked to see if I could get a set of my brother's medals that he'd received. And I didn't pursue it a lot because the one set that we were given was kind of passed back and forth. It was we have kind of a broken family, and they weren't treated real well. And I just wanted to get one good set. And I was told that there was a problem with the records in 1968, and that unless I had the old certificates, that it would be hard for them to recreate exactly what medals my brother was given. So I don't know what all that was about, but I didn't pursue it any further.
Sir, you should talk on that. I'll just jump in. You should talk to your service casualty officer. They'll be able to assist you with that.
Okay. The other thing is that I was told is that in the 90s, my brother's airman card was in the possession of a Vietnamese officer, and also his Geneva Convention card was found at a Hanoi War Museum, and which is where it still is at. And it's my understanding that if in fact my brother did make it from the crash site, he was a PJ. He was rescuing a pilot that ejected from an F-105 Thunder Chief on Christmas Eve 1968. I was told that none of the area surrounding the Hanoi Hilton, none of that's been excavated because the Vietnamese government won't allow us to excavate around the Hanoi Hilton for prisoners that possibly perished while in prison or as a result of their injuries after they got to prison. Does anybody know if that's true or not? I mean, do we still have have we excavated around the Hanoi Hilton?
So typically we have to have specific evidence of specific material evidence. We have to make a reason to dig. We have to have a reason to dig. They're not going to allow us, and frankly, we won't get approval to just kind of dig willy-nilly around a prison hoping that there might be remains of prisoners there. We need to follow a trail of evidence to give us a location on a specific case to get permission to dig.
I wouldn't suggest willy-nilly. I was suggesting possibly with some sort of something where you could detect whether there was a shallow grave somewhere around. My understanding is that there's a lot of shallow graves around the Hanoi Hilton, and that none of that area has ever been looked at or through.
We were at the Hanoi Hilton, the Wallow prison, 2 weeks ago. And one of the problems there is that it is an office building now. Most of the land around there, other than what they are actually using as an exhibit, has been converted into big office buildings.
Wow.
So it would be difficult to get permission to do something that's already been. And I think those office buildings went up in the last 10 to 15 years. So it's a museum now, and it's the museum of what was there when the French built Wallow Prison, which became the Hanoi Hilton, from our perspective. So that would be a difficult thing.
Yeah, build okay. So there'd be no way to know.
Yeah, and I don't know if we have any kind of evidence or historical records that would tell us that
there
was
was
a location. So I don't know the answer to that.
There was
but it would
in 1975 there were prisoners that they were told that they were prisoners.
I don't know. Do you guys know if there was excavations outside of Hanoi after?
We really don't know, but right now the kind of strangely the role of America in the Wallow prison has been minimized so much so because they make it into a because it was originally a French prison for Vietnamese political prisoners. So the role of America in that prison has been minimized to, sadly, we played a lot of volleyball and had Christmas trees there kind of thing. So that's a whole other deal.
I'm Buddy, a research analyst in Crystal City in Hanoi, and there's a died in captivity list. Those prisoners that died in the prison system is on the died in captivity list, and some of the individuals that did die in captivity were in Wallow. They weren't buried in the vicinity of Wallow, which is the Hanoi Hilton. They were actually taken to these cemeteries, and we have evidence that they went to those cemeteries and exhumed those remains and returned them back in the 70s and 80s after 1975.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to move over to this side, please.
Thanks, buddy.
Okay. Yes, I need a clarification on 50 U.S.C. Code Section 435, which is disclosure of information on U.S. personnel on Cold War, Korean War, Vietnam War. The exceptions part where the Secretary of Defense may not make a record or other information public. And then A, in case of a person who is alive and not incapacitated and whose whereabouts are known, that person expressly consents in writing to the disclosure of the record or other information. B is in case a person is dead or incapacitated or whose whereabouts are unknown, a family member or someone designated by the Secretary of Defense would make that decision. So I just need a clarification on A, if that is a person, a POW that's alive, they're not going to be able to sign a document saying they can release information about them. Is that what that statement is saying? That it has to be a person that is alive and we're talking about a POW?
Yeah, so thank you for giving me advance warning.
You're welcome. And I did yesterday.
Of your question, and let me borrow your document so I could review it.
Okay.
So, frankly, that passage.
Oh, you want it now?
No, I don't need it now. No, I said thank you for letting me borrow it last night. And I have witnesses that prove that I gave it back to you today.
Yes, you did.
Because you threatened me with an inch of my life if I did not return
did not.
it. So everyone here is a witness that I have returned her document, which I actually have a copy of. But so I'm familiar with that, and frankly, what I told our lawyer is like that passage has never made sense to me. Because number one, McCain applies to unaccounted for individuals as specified in the law, right? If they're unaccounted for, how could they be alive with a known whereabouts, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess the answer is yes. It could be referring to POWs or last known alive cases. But I think that the answer is I don't think it's applicable today because there's no credible information that there are any live
that's been released
POWs, right? So, and I understand the question is, can they use that as a reason not to release the information because they don't have approval? I think in that case, based on, and Brad can correct me if I'm wrong here, the overwhelming evidence right now is there is no credible evidence of any live POWs or last known alives. We still have some fate determinations to do on last known alive cases. I am aware of that. But I think the next step would be the family member in that section can approve release of that information under McCain, yes or no. So, Jennifer, you wrote that, so tell me if I screwed that up. I wasn't going to call on her because she loves getting in front of people.
Thanks for that. Just one other thing to add. Your question about asking a person if you can't find them or if they're incapacitated. The McCain bill applies to the release of information having to do with treatment, location, and or condition of an individual. We as a government had to go to the primary next of kin of that individual to ask whether or not the information could be released to the Library of Congress. So it doesn't apply to asking the individual who's incapacitated or whose whereabouts are known. It's about asking the primary next of kin whether we had the ability or the approval to release that information. And it's only information that has to do with treatment, location, and or condition. Does that help?
No, because okay, let me just say this. The reason this is a concern, because if there is information out there about a live POW, someone that survived past 1975, we would not have, nobody has that information right now because it's classified. There's things that we all want that are classified, that the government has classified it. But the reason I'm concerned is because someone found a document in the Library of Congress the first part of the year. It was a CIA document. It was about my brother-in-law and John Hummel, that they were POW in 1972, and we never received that document. So right there, it was a violation of law that we did not get that document. But whenever things are declassified, that families can get classified information, right now it's 53 flipping years. And some of these people, it's been longer. So I guess when the last one of us are dead, they're going to release the information. But I just wanted to clarify if that is what it means. But you're saying it means a family member?
The family member is who gives the approval to the government to release the information. That's when we went in the 1990s, we went out to all of the primary next of kins from the Vietnam War, the Korean War, and the Cold War to ask whether or not we had approval, permission to release the information having to do with treatment, location, and or condition into the Library of Congress for the Vietnam War, into the National Archives for the Korean Cold War. So we have on record every PNOC who said either yes, and if they said yes, then the information was released. If they said no, then it was not released. And that was a one-time ask. Once an individual remains recovered and identified, and the case is resolved, even if they were a no, it reverts to being a yes.
Okay, but this is saying any information, which
well, that's just one portion of the law. So you have to read the law in total. You can't pick it apart. And if you read the rest of the law, it talks about treatment, location, and or condition. I believe it's probably the first paragraph in that document that you have. Treatment, location, and or condition.
Okay, we were denied the document that said my brother-in-law was prisoner of war by a CIA document. So all I'm saying is we're not getting the documents. And we were a McCain yes, that we said that they could release
McCain doesn't prevent a family from getting it. This is preventing the public release of it. You would get it unless it's classified. But that doesn't mean, if it were classified, it's not going to be the entire document, Susan. There will be certain things that will be redacted, but it doesn't mean you would not be informed.
We weren't informed. That's what I'm telling you. We weren't informed that my brother-in-law...
Without having benefit of seeing the document and without knowing what the analytical position is on that, I really can't address that question.
Right.
I don't think anyone can.
You said it's a CIA document that you found in the Library of Congress. So,
a friend found it within my brother-in-law's case file that we were never given.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
All right, over on this side.
My name's Chris Bowles. This is actually my first time here. I'm on behalf of my great uncle, Lieutenant Warren Bowles, who drove F4s off of Kitty Hawk. Just to touch on the body not recoverable and the water losses, that's unfortunately how he died. I'm just curious, with revisiting those cases, if there's a certain depth of water that you would consider a cutoff that would still remain in that status.
So the question is the depth of the water. Are we taking that into account?
Well, that's my question. Right. You mentioned that with the newer technology and whatever, and going back and revisiting those water loss cases that were deemed body not recoverable. I was just curious if there is a depth of water beyond that you would still consider that as unrecoverable.
So we've traditionally used. Does anybody want to talk about diving depths?
So currently U.S. capability for our saturation dive teams is limited to 1,000 feet. That being said, the deeper you go, the higher toll it takes on the human body. So going to that depth, we are extremely limited with the time that we can spend down there just because of how hard it is on the divers. Those depths also complicate our ability to actually do the recovery because we essentially use giant vacuums on the bottom to pull up sediment and push it into a basket. That basket is then brought up on deck of the ship where we will search it, similar to a land site. So is it possible to do a recovery at extreme depths? Yes, but it is then complicated by being able to locate that wreck. So especially when it comes to jet aircraft, when they're coming in at high speeds, you hit the water, it's like concrete. Stuff doesn't necessarily stay together well. Those sites can be as small as 20 square meters up to miles. So one of the bigger issues we have with water losses is even locating the aircraft. You want to add anything to that? Or?
Yeah, in addition to that, so we take into account water depths. We also know for a lot of these cases whether the crew was in or out of the aircraft. If they're out of the aircraft, we're not going to be looking for that aircraft wreckage because the guy's out of the aircraft and there's probably nothing we can do on a case like that.
Go here.
Rick Holland, son of Melvin Holland, Lima Side 85. No question, I just got two comments. I've been asked quite a few times this week out here about my gold star and how to get one. And so for everyone that doesn't have one, I'd say check with your service casualty officer. They should be able to get you one. And the last thing I want to say is just a public thank you to Colonel Brannon. Matt, you've been a staunch supporter of all our families. You've done a fantastic job in the time you've been here. And like the director has said, we're all going to miss you very, very much, man. Good luck on your next one.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, go ahead back there.
Trying to make me cry again, you know.
I'm not going to make you cry. I think this is probably again Barbara Burcham. My husband was Captain James Burcham, MACV SOG, 1968. I think this is. I have a comment and then a question. Comment first, Mr. McKeague. When I was in Las Vegas last October at the Special Ops reunion, a contingency of you gave a presentation to the SOG people. And Fern was there, and one of the things she stated was that you guys were seriously considering giving 6 scholarships to Cambodians who were studying forensic anthropology so that they could complete their education and then help you with the recovery, and it would be a goodwill gesture. I would like to suggest that you give those, if you're still going to do that out of your budget, to our veterans who've already given a sacrifice, and maybe with the caveat that they, on completion, give you a year's worth of their time. So you're going to get the benefit of somebody helping you for a year, but you're also giving a benefit to the veteran who has also given service to this country. That's just a suggestion. I'd like to ask the person who responded to the Wallow prison thing. Yes, okay. Okay, I understand Wallow prison, been there, done that. But there were several other prisons in Vietnam. We had the plantation, you had the zoo, and then there was this was Cambodia, V211 hospital. We know there were Americans that were buried there. In the zoo and in the plantation, I'm going to guess that they also created a cemetery for those POWs that passed away. Have those locations ever been asked to go to and exhume bodies?
Yeah, I'm not qualified to answer that, so you are.
I'm not, but buddy.
So I was the person that answered the Wallow prison. And so the died in captivity list were those, that was a list that was provided by the Vietnamese to us. And the individuals that were in the system, like up in, you're right, there was the Hanoi Hilton, and then there was the zoo and the plantation and these other locations, and there's a list of them. And those that were in these structured POW camps in the north, I think that we've accounted for most, if not all of those. The problem is that there were a lot of people that were in captivity, especially down in the south in V211 and these other locations where the structures weren't fixed or permanent, and we still don't have those individuals back. And from 1973 to 1975, we had a 4-party joint military team that was supposed to work with the ARVN in the U.S. and the PAVN and the VC, and they were supposed to work together to recover sites like that, as well as crash sites that were most easily accessible in the South. But they weren't. There were a lot of issues that were going on at the time, and I think that even back then, which would have been the best time to address those sites, we weren't able to relocate them, and we didn't have the success that we wanted to. So those sites, I mean, I have some cases like that, and so we're still working them to try and locate them, but as time goes on, it gets harder, but we're working on it.
And if I may, Barbara, I'll address your wonderful suggestion about veterans. So some time ago, we learned that the British were involving veterans in some of their conflict archaeology. And we learned that it had a terrific rehabilitative effect for the veterans. It helped them with transitioning to kind of a civilian thing. It allowed them to participate in the continuation of the military mission. There were wonderful benefits. So I turned to the director and said, sir, I really want to promote using partners who involve veterans. And we now have a number of partners that do exactly that. One is, there's just quite a few. And we have a Special Forces group, Task Force Dagger, that uses veterans for underwater. We have a group that uses veterans. It's founded by a retired Air Force chaplain who has a master's in or PhD in archaeology. And as we did that, we also realized we needed to be careful and make sure that we had guidelines in place to ensure the veteran. Traveling to a remote location can be stressful. Finding remains can be stressful. So we brought in an outside consultant to make sure we have really good guidelines in place based on appropriate subject matter expertise that they will be properly taken care of in the missions. And when these veterans do that, their expenses are generally covered. So we want to treat them fairly in every department. On the Cambodian Completion Initiative, it's 3 students. And again, the notion there is we're getting the Cambodian government, we're motivating them to support all of our efforts in Cambodia for permitting, et cetera. And the students will actually be participating in field work. So we're getting a twofer, if you will, and building, hopefully, better relations with Cambodia. So I think it's fair to say we're doing both the things that you recommend. So thank you for those suggestions.
All right.
Yes, I don't know if the gentleman that was just talking to Barbara, is he still in here? I don't know if I understood you right. Did you say that there were still POWs that were buried in Vietnam, North Vietnam, that have not been returned? I don't know if I understood you right.
I did not say that. I said, to the best of my knowledge, those that were in the active prison system in the North, speaking without looking at a database right now, I can tell you that it's my understanding that they were returned. Those that weren't in the structured system, those did not.
Okay.
Not all of them, some of them, but the majority of as far as I know, the ones that were in the structured system in the North that died in captivity were returned. It was the ones that weren't in the structured system.
That you don't know their names?
I won't go into their names. The ones that are on the died in captivity list. So the ones that we are aware that got captured at the time, that were captured by the Vietnamese, that were in their custody and that died before Operation Homecoming in 1973, they were on a list that the Vietnamese provided to us. And of those individuals, the ones that were in the North in the system were buried in cemeteries, and they were returned after 1973, actually from I think 76 until around up to 91 at the
1990.
latest.
1990 was the last.
1990.
Thank you. All right, this is going to be the last question.
Oh, you made it back, Ed. I didn't keep you out long enough.
Matt was just waiting for this to happen. Colonel Brannon. First of all, I am a veteran. I don't have a family. The question about veterans, I think, is a really good one. And I wish to heck we could get more veterans involved in going to these case sites. But I had three of my friends killed who were not returned, or whose bodies were not returned. I was a 105 pilot in Southeast Asia. We did recover one of them, but I asked early on DPAA, at that time it was DIPMO, if I could go on some of those missions, and they pretty much said, go somewhere else. So I made 6 trips to Laos myself looking for them, and we did recover one of them, and now I've made 2 more trips on my own to recover a second one, and a third one is sitting right in front of me here. This family was a 111 guy who was a 105 pilot with me. We need to get veterans more involved. I want to answer one more question. The question came up about imagery. For years, and I've been at this 15 years with DPAA, I have asked them on many occasions for imagery, and I've never really gotten any from DPAA. The League of Families has a research group, and the guy's name is Glenn Hines. I can call up Glenn Hines anytime, give him a case number, and I can get imagery. And I know that he has attempted, or maybe DPAA has attempted, to have a relationship with him, but somehow that's broke down. This guy works for nothing, and he's really good. He is really good. At any rate, maybe you'd respond to those 2 issues.
Who has the...
Yes, I totally agree with you about veterans' participation, and we are encouraging that with our partners. We're seeing it all the time. We had a couple of interesting aspects of that. We actually have a Gulf War double amputee who is a certified diver, and he's been working with a partner for years. And then recently we had Air Force retired Major General participate, and he was so involved in this, he asked the Service Casualty Office if he could go to the interment for they recovered the individual, and he presented the flag to the family. So I mean, he cries when he talks about it. So yes, we are encouraging that. Again, we've put guidelines in place because we just want to make sure. You've heard about some of these sites being very austere and complicated, so just making sure that we do it right and the veterans are treated very well. Mr. Hines, we have tried to work with him. I can't remember the exact specifics as I'm talking to you. I can look into it some more. We've had situations where at one point it's been difficult to work with a potential partner, and then we revisit it. So we don't give up. We're open, so I'll look at what the circumstances were, and I can perhaps provide you more after I review what happened.
Yeah, I'll just tell you the agreement, we sent it to him, it's in his court. We asked him a specific thing to do, and it's in his court. I'll just be honest with you. So, hi, Glenn. That's reality. And yesterday when we, so this came up, and Ed, I think you're talking about like veterans like yourself going on missions like to accompany GFAs. Is that what you're asking?
I'd just like to see more veterans who are actually through the mission.
Yeah,
and
okay.
who are involved with what was going on, go over and analyze what's happening.
That's exactly what I thought you were asking, so I'll ask the question that I thought you were answer. We addressed this yesterday. I don't know if you're in the room, but if we have veterans who have specific knowledge and information that can help us with a specific case, we can issue what we call invitational travel orders to that veteran to accompany the team, right? There's a lot of factors that come into play, like the health of the individual, The gentleman yesterday, I don't know if he's in here to phone a friend, but right, he said he had to get like 15 shots when he did that. It can be going into an austere environment, medical concern, right? So there's a swath of things, but look, if there's an F-111 pilot that's ready to roll and they can help us with specific cases, we can talk through that. I think the boss actually talked about you getting ITO at one point. So we're willing to work with that, but there is a limit to that. We want to take people out who have, in those cases, who have specific information about a particular case. Does that answer your question?
Sure. All right. This really is the final question. No, come on, Rocky.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to confirm what you're saying, because you did take our search and rescue it was rescue at that point, the day after the Army Ranger that went into my brother's crash site in Cambodia. The next day he had information and whatever, came back, did the whole thing. Years and years went by. 2002, he contacted our family out of the blue and told us information, and I spoke with casualty officers. I'm not even sure how I went about doing it, but I know you had something to do. Well, somebody approved it.
I wasn't here in 2002.
No. He went yeah. Just like, 5 or 6 years ago? Yeah. He was taken back on the team at the excavation site.
Yes.
And I believe he was very helpful with the information he had.
Yeah. That's an exact example of what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
Where we can.
So
it
is possible to have it happen. And that was invitational.
Yes. Thank you for giving me credit, but I wasn't here 5 years ago.
Well, no, not in 2002, but it was in the last few years, though. And I think your name did come up during the whole process. So I think you did have something
Hopefully not
to do
as an
with
obstructionist.
No, there was no obstruction.
Thank you. Hey, thank you, Director McKeague.
Thank you.
You want to release it?
Yes.
Oh, so you want to release it?
Yo, folks, you can. Thank you for those.
Any final announcements?
The surveys, by the way, if you haven't finished your survey, or if you haven't, please do so, and just leave them in the center of the table. We're going to go around and collect them all, so don't worry about trudging up to the casualty offices like we said before. We will get those. So thank you very much. On behalf of the OC team, I appreciate you all attending. We know this is difficult and frustrating, but we hope we provided some value to you. And with that, I'll turn it over to the director.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard this multiple times. Our primary mission, mission 1, is to account for your loved ones. Equally important to that is to communicate and connect with you, which is why we brought you here to Washington, which is why we appreciate the time, effort you expended to travel from your homes to congregate here. Now, do we communicate and connect with you as effectively as we should? I think during this Q&A session, obviously not. Shame on us. I'm sure in your individual case summary reviews, you would give us maybe a C grade, maybe a D grade, maybe an F grade. The onus is on us. But I want to assure you that as committed as we are to accounting for your loved one, we're also equally committed to communicating and connecting with you. I can only assure you and pledge to you, just as we will do our very best in all aspects, whether on the research side, the recovery side, or the identification side, we will continue to do our very best. And I pledge to you also that we will continue to strive, and to use that word carefully, to strive to better communicate and connect with you. We very much appreciate your patience. I told you in the very beginning yesterday, you have been with us the longest. You've heard that some of you have been with us since the very beginning. Your predecessors, your mothers, your fathers, your grandmothers, and grandfathers were the forerunners to why DPAA is what it is today. And for that, we are eternally grateful. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your understanding. And more importantly, know that truly, deep down in our hearts, we bring passion in addition to our talents and skill sets to this wonderful, sacred mission. God bless you all. Safe travels back as you travel home. And again, reach out to us if we are not serving you the way we should. God bless you all.